Hey, what's up, guys? Hey, good to be back with you again. So, as you know here, the plan that we have on this channel is going to be a little bit slow in developing. We want to create a new college football, a new version of college football for 2023, one that involves a lot of radical realignment. I've had people on prior videos ask questions about why don't you just use current conference setups and push for like slight changes instead of doing something really big. There are a couple of reasons for it, but one of the big ones I wanted to talk about today, which is getting past sort of the college football ranking system. So a little bit of background might be appropriate, right? I grew up in the suburbs of Salt Lake City, Utah. I grew up a BYU fan. If you watch earlier videos, you'll see me with like BYU sweatshirts and stuff like that on. I grew up at a time in which BYU was occasionally in the national conversation, but was often maligned, right? This would be like the early 90s, stuff like that. A team that occasionally would win brilliant games against really big teams. The first game I attended live was against Miami in 1990. I was 6 years old. Right, and that's a good example of like, BYU came on at home and won a game against the number one team of the country to basically start off their season, and kind of showed that, we do belong in the national picture. Now, all of that is good and fun and fine and so on, but there's a problem when you start looking into the ranking systems for football, especially when you look into its history. So I'm sure that there are those of you who know a lot more about the history than I do. When I read backwards and I look at how this system developed over time, I see it as sort of like the football equivalent of the way that they used to rank heavyweight boxers. I say the way they used to. I know that they still do it today. Just not as many people pay attention these days, right? And part of the theory behind this, I believe, is that, if you're undefeated and you had a really, really good season, well, that's one thing, but you need to have multiple seasons in a row for it to really wow people and to really get people excited. Now, I don't think that that's a really good excuse for why Florida State has been left out this year of the college football playoff discussion. I don't think that there's really any good reason for that. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. But that's another topic perhaps for another day. But, it's this idea that, rankings are, that the top 25 rankings are so important and that, the blue blood teams need to get the benefit of the doubt, even if they lose games once in a while, the teams that are not as well known or not so good and stuff like that. It's ideas like that I want to sort of stay away from in this project, right? The thing that's really interesting to me as we talk about this and as we look at ways to set up a new college football environment, the thing that I'm most interested in is trying to make it so that there's some sort of equity. And so, in other words, like you play against whatever your division is, and that's all you play against, and then only the teams that wind up in first place then advance up to the next round, right? Now, there's always going to be problems with equity, and we think we've seen some of this already as we've talked about this, because there's no way to divide up college football geographically to make it so that there's an equal number of like good ranked teams and sort of middle ground, unranked teams in every division, right? No matter what, if you have Ohio State and Michigan in the same conference or division or however you divide it up, it's not going to be fair because you don't have two teams of that caliber in the same division anywhere else in the world. I mean, that's just what the problem is, right? So, I mean, no matter what you do, it's not going to be perfect, but I would argue that it still is a little bit more interesting this way, that games have a little bit of additional importance, right? And you can prevent things from happening that constantly happen in modern college football, such as having a conference championship game that features two teams that already played against each other in the regular season play against each other again. And then worst thing that happens, of course, is then they all get in the playoff and play a third time. I mean, this is pointless. It's really stupid. So we're trying to stay away from that. We're trying to stay away from the ranking system. We want to stay away from anything that is done based on reputation or based on sort of arbitrary measures. And when you look into college football rankings, no matter how much sort of science you throw at it, there's always going to be a reputational part of this that comes into being. There are good reasons for that, and we'll talk about some of those reasons over time, especially things that happened in the past that are kind of surprising when you look at them. But yeah, I mean, the truth is that it's never really been that much of a science, right? I'll tell you, so I was born in '84. That was the year that BYU won the famous national championship, which is disputed if you're a fan of like the University of Washington. And I think that there really is a good argument to be made that Washington probably should have actually been the national champion that year, beating Oklahoma in the Rose Bowl and playing a much harder schedule. I will note that BYU did beat them in 1985, but these were two very different teams the next season, so it's kind of hard to make an argument one way or another. What I've learned over time, though, is that the reason why BYU was able to get the number 1 ranking in 1984 is because they had consistently had good seasons in the years prior, right? I'm doing this off the top of my head. I don't have anything open in front of me, but I know that BYU was undefeated in 1979, with the exception of the bowl game at the end of the season. With all the talk about in Provo about the Miracle Bowl in 1980, and all the miracles of God are with us, they sure don't talk about the 1979 bowl game that BYU lost barely when they were ranked like, I don't know, 3rd or 4th in the country or something like that, right after an undefeated season. All right, but BYU had an excellent season in 1979, 1980. And played well in the next couple of years, but it's not hard for them to play well against the WAC, right? After Arizona and Arizona State left in 75, the conference was just not the same. It wasn't as difficult to win as it had been before. And then 1983, again, I'm doing this off the top of my memory, but if I remember right, BYU lost like the first game of the season and then went on this winning streak. And so you had this setup back then where you had a good team, or a team that had played well year in and year out, that already had people's attention, that then went undefeated in 1984, despite really playing nobody, right? Okay, yeah, they played Pitt on the road to open up the season, and Pitt was like 3rd, but then Pitt ended up having, I think, like a losing record that year at the end of the season, right? So it really didn't turn out to be all that impressive, right? And the bowl game was against a Michigan team that had lost 4 games, and BYU still had to have a miracle to come back and win that, right? This is the problem that you have when you have this ranking system that's based largely on, promoting teams that don't lose, and then on what have you done for me lately, like over the last 5 years or whatever, and then on this reputation thing that is really like up in the air, right? I mean, you get these outcomes that are really not that interesting and not that desirable, and there's not much you can do about it. So I wanted to show you here, like, we're not going to use this system. We could come up with our own ranking system and kind of play around with it if we want. I want to show you here, though, how Action PC Football actually does it. I don't have a college football season open here. What I have here is, again, the 1980 replays where things left off all those months ago. The Browns at 5-5, we weren't playing so well. But if you want to see this, you go up here at the top to reports, and then to league, and then power rankings. I don't know why they have this hidden away, but they do, right? And what you get is a notepad document, a TXT file that will put teams in a certain ranked order. For some reason, we are ranked 4th, despite having a worse record than, say, Buffalo, and a worse point differential. So I don't know exactly where this power number is coming from. I suppose we can look into the help file, and maybe we could figure it out. But I think that, so I think that the manual requires us to actually go online and take a look at it. I'll look that up a little bit later on. But yeah, if you're running your own college football season, you want to know how to do this. What most people will do is they'll go over the power rankings, and then they'll take like a real close look at these teams and make adjustments as needed, right? And we could do that as well if we want to look at just like the top 20 or the top 25 in our own project, just for fun, to sort of see how things would shake out, right? There's not too much, I think, of a deep science to it, but we'll look into that. Might be a good thing to look at next time to see how this power number is generated. And that's kind of the way that it works. There are a lot of things that I wish were different for Action PC Football. Definitely one thing that I wish were changed is I wish that this system were a little bit more, better developed. I wish that you had something in which, the game would have some sort of built-in reputation system, or in which, we could look back at old rankings, since we have rankings going back to the beginning of college football rankings, and look for different patterns and try to emulate that. That I think would be a little bit more interesting. But, as it stands, we can always use this, and we can make adjustments as we see fit to come up with a ranking system. just for fun, right? But like I said, when it comes to like who the champion is, I would want to eschew any sort of ranking system and this stupid thing where we choose 4 teams, and instead have, division champions or whatever we're gonna call it, and then have them play in an actual playoff, right? So the idea here again is you divide the country up into basically 8 divisions, and then 8 teams will move forward, and you have an 18 playoff at the end, only made up of teams that finished in first place, right? And so that's probably what we're going to deal with. Yeah, there are going to be second place teams that are going to be left out, right? But that's part of the fun of it that creates fun, intrigue, and a good storyline. I consider that to be better than what we currently have, where we have teams that probably should have been left out that are replacing teams that didn't lose, which is ridiculous. So anyway, that's my opinion on that. Love to know what you guys think. Talk to you again later. Bye.